Chapter 1 I battle the cheerleading squad. The last thing I wanted to do on my summer break was blow up another school. But there I was Monday morning, the first week of June, sitting in my mom's car in front of Good High School on East 81st. Good was this big brownstone building, overlooking the East River. A bunch of BMWs and Lincoln Town cars were parked out front. Staring up at the fancy stone archway, I wondered how long it would take me to get kicked out of this place. Just relax. My mom didn't sound relaxed. It's only an orientation tour. And remember, dear, this is Paul's school. So try not to, destroy it. Yes. Paul Blowfies, my mom's boyfriend, was standing out front, greeting future 9th graders as they came up the steps. With his salt and pepper hair, denim clothes, and leather jacket, he reminded me of a TV actor. But he was just an English teacher. He'd managed to convince Good High School to accept me for 9th grade, despite the fact that I'd gotten kicked out of every school I'd ever attended. I'd tried to warn him it wasn't a good idea, but he wouldn't listen. I looked at my mom. You haven't told him the truth about me, have you? She tapped her fingers nervously on the wheel. She was dressed up for a job interview, her best blue dress and high-heeled shoes. I thought we should wait, she admitted, so we don't scare him away. I'm sure orientation will be fine, Percy, it's only one morning. Great. I mumbled. I can get expelled before I start the school year. Think positive. Tomorrow you're off to camp. After orientation, you've got your date. It's not a date. I protested. It's just Annabeth. Mom. Geez. She's coming all the way from camp to meet you. Well, yeah. You're going to the movies. Yeah. Just the two of you. Mom. She held up her hands in surrender, but I could tell she was trying hard not to smile. You'd better get inside, dear. I'll see you tonight. I was about to get out of the car when I looked over the steps of the school. Paul Blowfies was greeting a girl with frizzy red hair. She wore a maroon t-shirt and ratty jeans decorated with marker drawings. When she turned, I caught a glimpse of her face, and the hairs on my arms stood straight up. Percy? My mom asked. What's wrong? Nothing. I stammered. Does the school have a side entrance? Down the block on the right. Why? I'll see you later. My mom started to say something, but I got out of the car and ran, hoping the red-headed girl wouldn't see me. What was she doing here? Not even my luck could be this bad. Yeah. Right. I was about to find out my luck could get a lot worse. Sneaking into orientation didn't work out too well. Two cheerleaders in purple and white uniforms were standing at the side entrance, waiting to ambush freshmen. Hi. They smiled, which I figured was the first and last time any cheerleaders would be that friendly to me. One was blonde with icy blue eyes. The other was African American with dark curly hair like Medusa's, and believe me, I know what I'm talking about. Both girls had their names stitched in cursive on their uniforms. But with my dyslexia, the words looked like meaningless spaghetti. Welcome to Good. The blonde girl said, you are so going to love it. But as she looked me up and down, her expression said something more like, EWW, who is this loser? The other girl stepped uncomfortably close to me. I studied the stitching on her uniform and made out Kelly. She smelled like roses and something else I recognized from riding lessons at camp. the scent of freshly washed horses. It was a weird smell for a cheerleader. Maybe she owned a horse or something. Anyway, she stood so close I got the feeling she was going to try to push me down the steps. "What's your name?" "Fish, freshman." Percy." The girls exchanged looks. "Oh, Percy Jackson," the blonde one said. "We've been waiting for you." That sent a major chill down my back. They were blocking the entrance, smiling in a not very friendly way. My hand crept instinctively toward my pocket, where I kept my lethal ballpoint pen, Riptide. Then another voice came from inside the building. "Percy?" It was Paul Blofeld, somewhere down the hallway. I'd never been so glad to hear his voice. The cheerleaders backed off. I was so anxious to get past them I accidentally kneed Kelly in the thigh. Clang! Her leg made a hollow, metallic sound, like I'd just hit a flagpole. "Ow!" she muttered. "Watch it, Fish." I glanced down, but her leg looked like a regular old leg. I was too freaked out to ask questions. I dashed into the hall. The cheerleaders laughing behind me. "There you are," Paul told me. "Welcome to good." "Hey, Paul." Mr. Blofeld." I glanced back, but the weird cheerleaders had disappeared. "Percy, you look like you've seen a ghost." "Yeah." Paul clapped me on the back. "Listen, I know you're nervous, but don't worry. We get a lot of kids here with ADHD and dyslexia. The teachers know how to help." I almost wanted to laugh. If only ADHD and dyslexia were my biggest worries. I mean, I knew Paul was trying to help, but if I told him the truth about me, he'd either think I was crazy or he'd run away screaming. Those cheerleaders, for instance. I had a bad feeling about them. Then I looked down the hall, and I remembered I had another problem. The red-headed girl I'd seen on the front steps was just coming in the main entrance. "Don't notice me," I prayed. She noticed me. Her eyes widened. "Where's the orientation?" I asked Paul. "The gym. That way." "But, bye, Percy," he called, but I was already running. I thought I'd lost her. A bunch of kids were heading for the gym, and soon I was just one of 300 14-year-olds all crammed into the bleachers. A marching band played an out-of-tune fight song that sounded like somebody hitting a bag of cats with a metal baseball bat. Older kids, probably student council members, stood up front modeling the good school uniform. And looking all, hey, we're cool. Teachers milled around, smiling and shaking hands with students. The walls of the gym were plastered with big purple and white banners that said "Welcome, future freshmen," "Good is good," "We're all family," and a bunch of other happy slogans that pretty much made me want to throw up. None of the other freshmen looked thrilled to be here, either. I mean, coming to orientation in June, when school doesn't even start until September, is not cool. But at Good, we prepare to excel early. At least that's what the brochure said. The marching band stopped playing. A guy in a pinstripe suit came to the microphone and started talking, but the sound echoed around the gym, so I had no idea what he was saying. He might have been gargling. Someone grabbed my shoulder. "What are you doing here?" It was her. My red-headed nightmare. "Rachel Elizabeth Dare," I said. Her jaw dropped like she couldn't believe I had the nerve to remember her name. "And you're Percy somebody. I didn't get your full name last December when you tried to kill me. Look. I wasn't. I didn't. What are you doing? Here. Same as you. I guess. Orientation. You live in New York? What? You thought I lived at the Hoover Dam? It had never occurred to me. Whenever I thought about her, and I'm not saying I thought about her, she just like crossed my mind from time to time. Okay. I always figured she lived in the Hoover Dam area, since that's where I'd met her. We'd spent maybe 10 minutes together, during which time I'd accidentally swung a sword at her. She'd saved my life, and I'd run away chased by a band of supernatural killing machines. You know, your typical chance meeting. Some guy behind us whispered, "Hey, shut up. The cheerleaders are talking." "Hi, guys." A girl bubbled into the microphone. It was the blonde I'd seen at the entrance. "My name is Tammy, and this is like, Kelly." Kelly did a cartwheel. Next to me, Rachel yelped. Like someone had stuck her with a pin. A few kids looked over and snickered, but Rachel just stared at the cheerleaders in horror. Tammy didn't seem to notice the outburst. She started talking about all the great ways we could get involved during our freshman year. "Run," Rachel told me. "Now, why?" Rachel didn't explain. She pushed her way to the edge of the bleachers. Ignoring the frowning teachers and grumbling kids she was stepping on. I hesitated. Tammy was explaining how we were about to break into small groups and tour the school. Kelly caught my eye and gave me an amused smile, like she was waiting to see what I'd do. It would look bad if I left. Right now, Paul Blofees was down there with the rest of the teachers. He'd wonder what was wrong. Then I thought about Rachel Elizabeth Dare, and the special ability she'd shown last winter at Hoover Dam. She'd been able to see a group of security guards who weren't guards at all, who weren't even human. My heart pounding, I got up and followed her out of the gym. I found Rachel in the band room. She was hiding behind a bass drum in the percussion section. "Get over here," she said. "Keep your head down." I felt pretty silly hiding behind a bunch of bongos. But I crouched down beside her. "Did they follow you?" Rachel asked. "You mean the cheerleaders?" She nodded nervously. "I don't think so," I said. "What are they? What did you see?" Her green eyes were bright with fear. She had a sprinkle of freckles on her face that reminded me of constellations. Her maroon t-shirt read Harvard Art Department. You wouldn't believe me." "Oh, yeah, I would. I promised." "I know you can see through the mist." "The what?" "The mist. It's like this veil that hides the way things really are. Some mortals are born with the ability to see through it. Like you." She studied me carefully. "You did that at Hoover Dam. You called me a mortal. Like you're not." I felt like punching a bongo. What was I thinking? I could never explain. I shouldn't even try. "Tell me," she begged. "You know what it means. All these horrible things I see? Look. This is going to sound weird. Do you know anything about Greek myths? Like the Minotaur and the Hydra?" "Yeah. Just try not to say those names when I'm around, okay?" "And the Furies," she said, warming up. "And the Sirens, and okay." I looked around the band hall, sure that Rachel was going to make a bunch of bloodthirsty nasties pop out of the walls, but we were still alone. Down the hallway, I heard a mob of kids coming out of the gymnasium. They were starting the group tours. We didn't have long to talk. All those monsters, I said. All. The Greek gods. They're real. I knew it. I would have been more comfortable if she'd called me a liar, but Rachel looked like I'd just confirmed her worst suspicion. You don't know how hard it's been, she said. For years I thought I was going crazy. I couldn't tell anybody. I couldn't. Her eyes narrowed. Wait. Who are you? I mean really, I'm not a monster. Well, I know that. I could see if you were. You look like you. But you're not human. Are you? I swallowed. Even though I'd had 3 years to get used to who I was, I'd never talked about it with a regular mortal before. I mean, except for my mom, but she already knew. I don't know why, but I took the plunge. I'm a half-blood, I said. I'm half human. And half what? Just then Tammy and Kelly stepped into the band room. The doors slammed shut behind them. There you are, Percy Jackson, Tammy said. It's time for your orientation. Asterisk asterisk. They're horrible. Rachel gasped. Tammy and Kelly were still wearing their purple and white cheerleader costumes, holding pom-poms from the rally. What do they really look like? I asked, but Rachel seemed too stunned to answer. Oh, forget her. Tammy gave me a brilliant smile and started walking toward us. Kelly stayed by the doors, blocking our exit. They'd trapped us. I knew we'd have to fight our way out, but Tammy's smile was so dazzling it distracted me. Her blue eyes were beautiful, and the way her hair swept over her shoulders. Percy, Rachel warned. I said something really intelligent like, Tammy was getting closer. She held out her pom-poms. Percy. Rachel's voice seemed to be coming from a long way away. Snap out of it. It took all my willpower, but I got my pen out of my pocket and uncapped it. Riptide grew into a 3-foot-long bronze sword, its blade glowing with a faint golden light. Tammy's smile turned to a sneer. Oh, come on, she protested. You don't need that. How about a kiss instead? She smelled like roses and clean animal fur. A weird but somehow intoxicating smell. Rachel pinched my arm hard. Percy, she wants to bite you. Look at her. She's just jealous. Tammy looked back at Kelly. May I, mistress? Kelly was still blocking the door, licking her lips hungrily. Go ahead, Tammy. You're doing fine. Tammy took another step forward, but I leveled the tip of my sword at her chest. Get back, she snarled. Freshman, she said with disgust. This is our school. Half-blood. We feed on whom we choose. Then she began to change. The color drained out of her face and arms. Her skin turned as white as chalk, her eyes completely red. Her teeth grew into fangs. A vampire, I stammered. Then I noticed her legs. Below the cheerleader skirt, her left leg was brown and shaggy with a donkey's hoof. Her right leg was shaped like a human leg, but it was made of bronze. A vampire with, don't mention the legs. Tammy snapped. It's rude to make fun. She advanced on her weird, mismatched legs. She looked totally bizarre, especially with the pom-poms, but I couldn't laugh, not facing those red eyes and sharp fangs. A vampire, you say? Kelly laughed. That silly legend was based on us, you fool. We are Percy, servants of Hecate. Tammy edged closer to me. Dark magic formed us. from animal, bronze, and ghost. We exist to feed on the blood of young men. Now come, give me that kiss." She bared her fangs. I was so paralyzed I couldn't move, but Rachel threw a snare drum at the Empusa's head. The demon hissed and batted the drum away. It went rolling along the aisles between music stands, its springs rattling against the drumhead. Rachel threw a xylophone, but the demon just swatted that away, too. "I don't usually kill girls," Tammy growled. "But for you, mortal, I'll make an exception. Your eyesight is a little too good." She lunged at Rachel. "No." I slashed with riptide. Tammy tried to dodge my blade, but I sliced straight through her cheerleader uniform, and with a horrible wail she exploded into dust all over Rachel. Rachel coughed. She looked like she'd just had a sack of flour dumped on her head. "Gross. Monsters do that," I said. "Sorry. You killed my trainee," Kelly yelled. "You need a lesson in school spirit, half-blood." Then she too began to change. Her wiry hair turned into flickering flames. Her eyes turned red. She grew fangs. She loped toward us, her brass foot and hoof clopping unevenly on the band room floor. "I am Senior Empusa," she growled. "No hero has bested me in 1,000 years." "Yeah," I said. "Then you're overdue." Kelly was a lot faster than Tammy. She dodged my first strike and rolled into the brass section, knocking over a row of trombones with a mighty crash. Rachel scrambled out of the way. I put myself between her and the Empusa. Kelly circled us, her eyes going from me to the sword. "Such a pretty little blade," she said. "What a shame it stands between us." Her form shimmered. Sometimes a demon, sometimes a pretty cheerleader. I tried to keep my mind focused, but it was really distracting. "Poor dear," Kelly chuckled. "You don't even know what's happening, do you? Soon, your pretty little camp in flames, your friends made slaves to the Lord of Time, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. It would be merciful to end your life now, before you have to see that." From down the hall, I heard voices. A tour group was approaching. A man was saying something about locker combinations. The Empusa's eyes lit up. "Excellent. We're about to have company." She picked up a tuba and threw it at me. Rachel and I ducked. The tuba sailed over our heads and crashed through the window. The voices in the hall died down. "Percy!" Kelly shouted, pretending to be scared. "Why did you throw that?" I was too surprised to answer. Kelly picked up a music stand and swiped a row of clarinets and flutes. Chairs and musical instruments crashed to the floor. "Stop it," I said. People were tromping down the hall now, coming in our direction. "Time to greet our visitors." Kelly bared her fangs and ran for the doors. I charged after her with riptide. I had to stop her from hurting the mortals. "Percy, don't!" Rachel shouted. But I hadn't realized what Kelly was up to until it was too late. Kelly flung open the doors. Paul Blofeld and a bunch of freshmen stepped back in shock. I raised my sword. At the last second, the Empusa turned toward me like a cowering victim. "Oh no. Please!" she cried. I couldn't stop my blade. It was already in motion. Just before the celestial bronze hit her, Kelly exploded into flames like a Molotov cocktail. Waves of fire splashed over everything. I'd never seen a monster do that before, but I didn't have time to wonder about it. I backed into the band room as the flames engulfed the doorway. Percy, Paul. Blowfies looked completely stunned, staring at me from across the fire. What have you done? Kids screamed and ran down the hall. The fire alarm wailed. Ceiling sprinklers hissed to life. In the chaos, Rachel tugged on my sleeve. You have to get out of here. She was right. The school was in flames and I'd be held responsible. Mortals couldn't see through the mist properly. To them it would look like I'd just attacked a helpless cheerleader in front of a group of witnesses. There was no way I could explain it. I turned from Paul and sprinted for the broken band room window. I burst out of the alley onto East 81st and ran straight into Annabeth. Hey, you're out early. She laughed, grabbing my shoulders to keep me from tumbling into the street. Watch where you're going, seaweed brain. For a split second she was in a good mood and everything was fine. She was wearing jeans and an orange camp t-shirt and her clay bead necklace. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail. Her gray eyes sparkled. She looked like she was ready to catch a movie, have a cool afternoon hanging out together. Then Rachel Elizabeth Dare, still covered in monster dust, came charging out of the alley, yelling, "Percy, wait up." Annabeth's smile melted. She stared at Rachel, then at the school. For the first time, she seemed to notice the black smoke and ringing fire alarms. She frowned at me. What did you do this time? And who is this? Oh. Rachel. Annabeth. Annabeth. Rachel. She's a friend, I guess. I wasn't sure what else to call Rachel. I mean, I barely knew her, but after being in two life or death situations together, I couldn't just call her nobody. Hi, Rachel said. Then, she turned to me. You are in so much trouble. And you still owe me an explanation. Police. Sirens wailed on FDR Drive. Percy, Annabeth said coldly. We should go. I want to know more about half-bloods, Rachel insisted. And monsters. And this stuff about the gods. She grabbed my arm, whipped out a permanent marker, and wrote a phone number on my hand. You're going to call me and explain, okay? You owe me that. Now get going. But I'll make up some story, Rachel said. I'll tell them it wasn't your fault. Just go. She ran back toward the school, leaving Annabeth and me in the street. Hey, I jogged after her. There were these two Percy, I tried to explain. They were cheerleaders, see? And they said camp was going to burn, and you told a mortal girl about half-bloods. She can see through the mist. She saw the monsters before I did. So you told her the truth. She recognized me from Hoover Dam, so you've met her before? Last winter. But seriously, I barely know her. She's kind of cute. I never thought about it. Annabeth kept walking toward York Avenue. I'll deal with the school, I promised, anxious to change the subject. Honest. It'll be fine. Annabeth wouldn't even look at me. I guess our afternoon is off. We should get you out of here, now that the police will be searching for you. Behind us, smoke billowed up from Good High School. In the dark column of ashes, I thought I could almost see a face, a she-demon with red eyes, laughing at me. Your pretty little camp in flames, Kelly had said. Your friends made slaves to the Lord of Time. You're right, I told Annabeth, my heart sinking. We have to get to Camp Half-Blood now. Chapter 2 The underworld sends me a prank call. Nothing caps off the perfect morning like a long taxi ride with an angry girl. I tried to talk to Annabeth, but she was acting like I'd just punched her grandmother. All I managed to get out of her was that she'd had a monster-infested spring in San Francisco. She'd come back to camp twice since Christmas but wouldn't tell me why, which kind of ticked me off, because she hadn't even told me she was in New York, and she'd learned nothing about the whereabouts of Nico di Angelo. Long story. Any word on Luke? I asked. She shook her head. I knew this was a touchy subject for her. Annabeth had always admired Luke, the former head counselor for Hermes who had betrayed us and joined the evil Titan Lord Kronos. She wouldn't admit it, but I knew she still liked him. When we'd fought Luke on Mount Tamalpais last winter, he'd somehow survived a 50-foot fall off a cliff. Now, as far as I knew, he was still sailing around on his demon-infested cruise ship while his chopped-up Lord Kronos reformed, bit by bit, in a golden sarcophagus, biding his time until he had enough power to challenge the Olympian gods. In demigod speak, we call this a problem. Mount Tam is still overrun with monsters, Annabeth said. I didn't dare go close, but I don't think Luke is up there. I think I would know if he was. That didn't make me feel much better. What about Grover? He's at camp, she said. We'll see him today. Did he have any luck? I mean, with the search for Pan? Annabeth fingered her bead necklace, the way she does when she's worried. You'll see, she said. But she didn't explain. As we headed through Brooklyn, I used Annabeth's phone to call my mom. Half-bloods try not to use cell phones if we can avoid it, because broadcasting our voices is like sending up a flare to the monsters. Here I am. Please eat me now. But I figured this call was important. I left a message on our home voicemail, trying to explain what had happened at Good. I probably didn't do a very good job. I told my mom I was fine, she shouldn't worry, but I was going to stay at camp until things cooled down. I asked her to tell Paul Blofeld I was sorry. We rode in silence after that. The city melted away until we were off the expressway and rolling through the countryside of northern Long Island. Past orchards and wineries and fresh produce stands. I stared at the phone number Rachel Elizabeth Dare had scrawled on my hand. I knew it was crazy, but I was tempted to call her. Maybe she could help me understand what the Empusa had been talking about, the camp burning, my friends imprisoned, and why had Kelly exploded into flames. I knew monsters never truly died. Eventually, maybe weeks, months, or years from now, Kelly would reform out of the primordial nastiness seething in the underworld. But still, monsters didn't usually let themselves get destroyed so easily. If she really was destroyed. The taxi exited on Route 25A. We headed through the woods along the north shore until a low ridge of hills appeared on our left. Annabeth told the driver to pull over on Farm Road 3.141, at the base of Half-Blood Hill. The driver frowned. There ain't nothing here, miss. You sure you want out? Yes. Please. Annabeth handed him a roll of mortal cash, and the driver decided not to argue. Annabeth and I hiked to the crest of the hill. The young guardian dragon was dozing, coiled around the pine tree, but he lifted his coppery head as we approached and let Annabeth scratch under his chin. Steam hissed out his nostrils like from a tea kettle, and he went cross-eyed with pleasure. "Hey, Peleus," Annabeth said. "Keeping everything safe?" The last time I'd seen the dragon he'd been 6 feet long. Now he was at least twice that, and as thick around as the tree itself. Above his head, on the lowest branch of the pine tree, the golden fleece shimmered, its magic protecting the camp's borders from invasion. The dragon seemed relaxed, like everything was okay. Below us, Camp Half-Blood looked peaceful. Green fields, forest, shiny white Greek buildings. The 4-story farmhouse we called the Big House sat proudly in the midst of the strawberry fields. To the north, past the beach, the Long Island Sound glittered in the sunlight. Still, something felt wrong. There was tension in the air, as if the hill itself were holding its breath, waiting for something bad to happen. We walked down into the valley and found the summer session in full swing. Most of the campers had arrived last Friday, so I already felt out of it. The satyrs were playing their pipes in the strawberry fields, making the plants grow with woodland magic. Campers were having flying horseback lessons, swooping over the woods on their Pegasi. Smoke rose from the forges, and hammers rang as kids made their own weapons for arts and crafts. The Athena and Demeter teams were having a chariot race around the track, and over at the canoe lake some kids in a Greek trireme were fighting a large orange sea serpent. A typical day at camp. "I need to talk to Clarice," Annabeth said. I stared at her as if she'd just said I need to eat a large, smelly boot. "What for?" Clarice from the Ares cabin was one of my least favorite people. She was a mean, ungrateful bully. Her dad, the war god, wanted to kill me. She tried to beat me to a pulp on a regular basis. Other than that, she was just great. "We've been working on something," Annabeth said. "I'll see you later." "Working on what?" Annabeth glanced toward the forest. "I'll tell Chiron you're here," she said. "He'll want to talk to you before the hearing." "What hearing?" But she jogged down the path toward the archery field without looking back. "Yeah," I muttered. "Great talking with you, too." As I made my way through camp, I said hi to some of my friends. In the big house's driveway, Connor and Travis Stoll from the Hermes cabin were hot wiring the camp's SUV. Silena Beauregard, the head counselor for Aphrodite, waved at me from her Pegasus as she flew past. I looked for Grover, but I didn't see him. Finally I wandered into the sword arena, where I usually go when I'm in a bad mood. Practicing always calms me down. Maybe that's because swordplay is one thing I can actually understand. I walked into the amphitheater and my heart almost stopped. In the middle of the arena floor, with its back to me, was the biggest hellhound I'd ever seen. I mean, I've seen some pretty big hellhounds. One the size of a rhino tried to kill me when I was 12. But this hellhound was bigger than a tank. I had no idea how it had gotten past the camp's magic boundaries. It looked right at home, lying on its belly, growling contentedly as it chewed the head off a combat dummy. It hadn't noticed me yet, but if I made a sound, I knew it would sense me. There was no time to go for help. I pulled out Riptide and uncapped it. "Yeah!" I charged. I brought down the blade on the monster's enormous backside when out of nowhere another sword blocked my strike. Clang! The hellhound pricked up its ears. Woof! I jumped back and instinctively struck at the swordsman, a gray-haired man in Greek armor. He parried my attack with no problem. "Whoa there," he said. "Truce. Woof." The hellhound's bark shook the arena. "That's a hellhound," I shouted. "She's harmless," the man said. "That's Mrs. O'Leary." I blinked. Mrs. O'Leary. At the sound of her name, the hellhound barked. Again. I realized she wasn't angry. She was excited. She nudged the soggy, badly chewed target dummy toward the swordsman. "Good girl," the man said. With his free hand he grabbed the armored mannequin by the neck and heaved it toward the bleachers. "Get the Greek! Get the Greek!" Mrs. O'Leary bounded after her prey and pounced on the dummy, flattening its armor. She began chewing on its helmet. The swordsman smiled dryly. He was in his 50s, I guess, with short gray hair and a clipped gray beard. He was in good shape for an older guy. He wore black mountain climbing pants and a bronze breastplate strapped over an orange camp t-shirt. At the base of his neck was a strange mark, a purplish blotch like a birthmark or a tattoo, but before I could make out what it was, he shifted his armor straps and the mark disappeared under his collar. "Mrs. O'Leary is my pet," he explained. "I couldn't let you stick a sword in her rump. Now, could I? That might have scared her." "Who are you? Promise not to kill me if I put my sword away." "I guess." He sheathed his sword and held out his hand. "Quintus." I shook his hand. It was as rough as a sandpaper. "Percy Jackson," I said. "Sorry about. How did you, get a hellhound for a pet?" Long story, involving many close calls with a death and quite a few giant chew toys. I'm the new sword instructor, by the way. Helping out Chiron while Mr. D is away. Oh. I tried not to stare as Mrs. O'Leary ripped off the target dummy's shield with the arm still attached and shook it like a frisbee. "Wait. Mr. D is away?" "Yes. Well, busy times. Even Dionysus must help out. He's gone to visit some old friends. Make sure they're on the right side." I probably shouldn't say more than that. If Dionysus was gone, that was the best news I'd had all day. He was only our camp director because Zeus had sent him here as a punishment for chasing some off-limits wood nymph. He hated the campers and tried to make our lives miserable. With him away, this summer might actually be cool. On the other hand, if Dionysus had gotten off his butt and actually started helping the gods recruit against the Titan threat, things must be looking pretty bad. Off to my left, there was a loud bump. 6 wooden crates, the size of picnic tables, were stacked nearby, and they were rattling. Mrs. O'Leary cocked her head and bounded toward them. "Whoa, girl," Quintus said. "Those aren't for you." He distracted her with the bronze shield frisbee. The crates thumped and shook. There were words printed on the sides, but with my dyslexia they took me a few minutes to decipher. Triple G Ranch. Fragile. This end up along the bottom, in smaller letters, open with care. Triple G Ranch is not responsible for property damage, maiming, or excruciatingly painful deaths. "What's in the boxes?" I asked. A little surprised, Quintus said. "Training activity for tomorrow night. You'll love it." Okay," I said, though I wasn't sure about the excruciatingly painful death part. Quintus threw the bronze shield, and Mrs. O'Leary lumbered after it. "You young ones need more challenges. They didn't have camps like this when I was a boy." You're a half-blood?" I didn't mean to sound surprised, but I'd never seen an old demigod before. Quintus chuckled. Some of us do survive into adulthood, you know. Not all of us are the subject of terrible prophecies. You know about my prophecy? I've heard a few things. I wanted to ask what few things, but just then Chiron clip-clopped into the arena. Percy, there you are. He must have just come from teaching archery. He had a quiver and bow slung over his number 1 Centaur t-shirt. He'd trimmed his curly brown hair and beard for the summer. And his lower half, which was a white stallion, was flecked with mud and grass. I see you've met our new instructor. Chiron's tone was light, but there was an uneasy look in his eyes. Quintus, do you mind if I borrow Percy? Not at all, Master Chiron. No need to call me Master, Chiron said, though he sounded sort of pleased. Come, Percy, we have much to discuss. I took one more glance at Mrs. O'Leary, who was now chewing off the target dummy's legs. Well, see you, I told Quintus. As we were walking away, I whispered to Chiron. Quintus seemed kind of mysterious. Chiron suggested. Hard to read? Yeah. Chiron nodded. A very qualified half-blood. Excellent swordsman. I just wish I understood. Whatever he was going to say, he apparently changed his mind. First things first, Percy. Annabeth told me you met some Percy. Yeah. I told him about the fight at Good, and how Kelly had exploded into flames. Chiron said. The more powerful ones can do that. She did not die, Percy. She simply escaped. It is not good that the she-demons are stirring. What were they doing there? I asked. Waiting for me, possibly. Chiron frowned. It is amazing you survived. Their powers of deception, almost any male hero would have fallen under their spell and been devoured. I would have been, I admitted. Except for Rachel. Chiron nodded. Ironic to be saved by a mortal, yet we owe her a debt. What the Empusa said about an attack on camp. We must speak of this further. But for now, come. We should get to the woods. Grover will want you there. Where? At his formal hearing, Chiron said grimly. The Council of Cloven Elders is meeting now to decide his fate. Chiron said we needed to hurry, so I let him give me a ride on his back. As we galloped past the cabins, I glanced at the dining hall, an open-air Greek pavilion on a hill overlooking the sea. It was the first time I'd seen the place since last summer, and it brought back bad memories. Chiron plunged into the woods. Nymphs peeked out of the trees to watch us pass. Large shapes rustled in the shadows, monsters that were stocked in here as a challenge to the campers. I thought I knew the forest pretty well, after playing capture the flag here for 2 summers, but Chiron took me away I didn't recognize. Through a tunnel of old willow trees, past a little waterfall, and into a glade blanketed with wildflowers. A bunch of satyrs were sitting in a circle in the grass. Grover stood in the middle, facing 3 really old, really fat satyrs who sat on topiary thrones shaped out of rose bushes. I'd never seen the 3 old satyrs before, but I guessed they must be the Council of Cloven Elders. Grover seemed to be telling 'em a story. He twisted the bottom of his t-shirt, shifting nervously on his goat hooves. He hadn't changed much since last winter, maybe because satyrs age half as fast as humans. His acne had flared up. His horns had gotten a little bigger so they just stuck out over his curly hair. I realized with a start that I was taller than he was now. Standing off to one side of the circle were Annabeth, another girl I'd never seen before, and Clarice. Chiron dropped me next to them. Clarisse's stringy brown hair was tied back with a camouflage bandana. If possible, she looked even buffer, like she'd been working out. She glared at me and muttered, "Punk," which must have meant she was in a good mood. Usually she says hello by trying to kill me. Annabeth had her arm around the other girl, who looked like she'd been crying. She was small, petite, I guess you'd call it, with wispy hair the color of amber and a pretty elfish face. She wore a green chiton and laced sandals, and she was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. "It's going terribly," she sniffled. No. Annabeth patted her shoulders. "He'll be fine, Juniper." Annabeth looked at me and mouthed the words Grover's girlfriend. At least I thought that's what she said, but that didn't make any sense. Grover with a girlfriend? Then I looked at Juniper more closely, and I realized her ears were slightly pointed. Her eyes, instead of being red from crying, were tinged green, the color of chlorophyll. She was a tree nymph, a dryad. Master Underwood, the council member on the right, shouted, cutting off whatever Grover was trying to say. "Do you seriously expect us to believe this?" "But Silenus," Grover stammered. "It's the truth." The council guy, Silenus, turned to his colleagues and muttered something. Chiron cantered up to the front and stood next to them. I remembered he was an honorary member of the council, but I'd never thought about it much. The elders didn't look very impressive. They reminded me of the goats in a petting zoo. Huge bellies, sleepy expressions, and glazed eyes that couldn't see past the next handful of goat chow. I wasn't sure why Grover seemed so nervous. Silenus tugged his yellow polo shirt over his belly and adjusted himself on his rosebush throne. "Master Underwood, for 6 months, 6 months, we have been hearing these scandalous claims that you heard the wild god Pan speak." "But I did." "Impudence," said the elder on the left. "Now, Marin," Chiron said. "Patience. Patience. Indeed," Marin said. "I've had it up to my horns with this nonsense." As if the wild god would speak to him. Juniper looked like she wanted to charge the old satyr and beat him up, but Annabeth and Clarice held her back. "Wrong fight, girlie," Clarice muttered. "Wait. I don't know what surprised me more. Clarice holding someone back from a fight, or the fact that she and Annabeth, who despised each other, almost seemed like they were working together. For 6 months, Silenus continued, we have indulged you, Master Underwood. We let you travel. We allowed you to keep your searcher's license. We waited for you to bring proof of your preposterous claim. And what have you found in 6 months of travel? I just need more time, Grover pleaded. Nothing. The elder in the middle chimed in. You have found nothing. But Lennius, Silenus raised his hand. Chiron leaned in and said something to the satyrs. The satyrs didn't look happy. They muttered and argued among themselves. But Chiron said something else, and Silenus sighed. He nodded reluctantly. Master Underwood, Silenus announced, we will give you one more chance. Grover brightened. Thank you. 1 more week. What? But sir, that's impossible. 1 more week, Master Underwood. And then, if you cannot prove your claims, it will be time for you to pursue another career. Something to suit your dramatic talents. Puppet theatre, perhaps. Or tap dancing. But sir, I can't lose my searcher's license. My whole life. This meeting of the council is adjourned, Silenus said, and now let us enjoy our noonday meal. The old satyr clapped his hands, and a bunch of nymphs melted out of the trees with platters of vegetables, fruits, tin cans, and other goat delicacies. The circle of satyrs broke and charged the food. Grover walked dejectedly toward us. His faded blue t-shirt had a picture of a satyr on it. It read "Got hooves?" "Hi, Percy," he said, so depressed he didn't even offer to shake my hand. "That went well. Huh? Those old goats," Juniper said. "Oh, Grover, they don't know how hard you've tried. There is another option," Clarice said darkly. No, Juniper shook her head. "Grover, I won't let you." His face was ashen. I'll have to think about it. But we don't even know where to look." "What are you talking about?" I asked. In the distance, a conch horn sounded. Annabeth pursed her lips. "I'll fill you in later, Percy. We'd better get back to our cabins. Inspection is starting." It didn't seem fair that I'd have to do cabin inspection when I just got to camp, but that's the way it worked. Every afternoon, one of the senior counselors came around with a papyrus scroll checklist. Best cabin got first shower hour, which meant hot water guaranteed. Worst cabin got kitchen patrol after dinner. The problem for me? I was usually the only one in the Poseidon cabin, and I'm not exactly what you would call neat. The cleaning harpies only came through on the last day of summer, so my cabin was probably just the way I'd left it on winter break, my candy wrappers and chip bags still on my bunk, my armor for capture the flag lying in pieces all around the cabin. I raced toward the commons area, where the 12 cabins, one for each Olympian god, made a U around the central green. The Demeter kids were sweeping out theirs and making fresh flowers grow in their window boxes. Just by snapping their fingers, they could make honeysuckle vines bloom over their doorway. And daisies cover their roof, which was totally unfair. I don't think they ever got last place in inspection. The guys in the Hermes cabin were scrambling around in a panic, stashing dirty laundry under their beds and accusing each other of taking stuff. They were slobs, but they still had a head start on me. Over at the Aphrodite cabin, Silena Beauregard was just coming out, checking items off the inspection scroll. I cursed under my breath. Silena was nice, but she was an absolute neat freak, the worst inspector. She liked things to be pretty. I didn't do pretty. I could almost feel my arms getting heavy from all the dishes I would have to scrub tonight. The Poseidon cabin was at the end of the row of male god cabins on the right side of the green. It was made of gray shell-encrusted sea rock, long and low like a bunker, but it had windows that faced the sea and it always had a good breeze blowing through it. I dashed inside, wondering if maybe I could do a quick under-the-bed cleaning job like the Hermes guys, and I found my half-brother Tyson sweeping the floor. "Percy!" he bellowed. He dropped his broom and ran at me. "If you've never been charged by an enthusiastic cyclops wearing a flowered apron and rubber cleaning gloves, I'm telling you, it'll wake you up quick." "Hey, big guy," I said. "Ow. Watch the ribs." The ribs. I managed to survive his bear hug. He put me down, grinning like crazy. his single, calf-brown eye full of excitement. His teeth were as yellow and crooked as ever, and his hair was a rat's nest. He wore ragged XXXL jeans and a tattered flannel shirt under his flowered apron, but he was still a sight for sore eyes. I hadn't seen him in almost a year, since he'd gone under the sea to work at the Cyclopes forges. "You are okay?" he asked. "Not eaten by monsters?" "Not even a little bit." I showed him that I still had both arms and both legs. And Tyson clapped happily. "Yay," he said. "Now we can eat peanut butter sandwiches and ride fish ponies. We can fight monsters and see Annabeth and make things go boom." I hoped he didn't mean all at the same time, but I told him absolutely, we'd have a lot of fun this summer. I couldn't help smiling. He was so enthusiastic about everything. "But first," I said, "we've got to worry about inspection." "We should." Then I looked around and realized Tyson had been busy. The floor was swept. The bunk beds were made. The saltwater fountain in the corner had been freshly scrubbed so the coral gleamed. On the windowsills, Tyson had set out water-filled vases with sea anemones and strange glowing plants from the bottom of the ocean, more beautiful than any flower bouquets the Demeter kids could whip up. "Tyson, the cabin looks amazing," he beamed. "See the fish ponies?" I put him on the ceiling. A herd of miniature bronze hippocampi hung on wires from the ceiling, so it looked like they were swimming through the air. I couldn't believe Tyson, with his huge hands, could make things so delicate. Then I looked over at my bunk. And I saw my old shield hanging on the wall. "You fixed it." The shield had been badly damaged in a Matacore attack last winter. But now it was perfect again. Not a scratch. All the bronze pictures of my adventures with Tyson and Annabeth in the Sea of Monsters were polished and gleaming. I looked at Tyson. I didn't know how to thank him. Then somebody behind me said, "Oh my." Silena Beauregard was standing in the doorway with her inspection scroll. She stepped into the cabin, did a quick twirl, then raised her eyebrows at me. "Well, I had my doubts. But you clean up nicely, Percy. I'll remember that." She winked at me and left the room. Tyson and I spent the afternoon catching up and just hanging out, which was nice after a morning of getting attacked by demon cheerleaders. We went down to the forge and helped Beckendorf from the Hephaestus cabin with his metalworking. Tyson showed us how he'd learned to craft magic weapons. He fashioned a flaming double-bladed war axe so fast even Beckendorf was impressed. While he worked, Tyson told us about his year under the sea. His eye lit up when he described the Cyclopes forges and the Palace of Poseidon, but he also told us how tense things were. The old gods of the sea, who'd ruled during Titan times, were starting to make war on our father. When Tyson had left, battles had been raging all over the Atlantic. Hearing that made me feel anxious, like I should be helping out, but Tyson assured me that Dad wanted us both at camp. "Lots of bad people above the sea, too," Tyson said. "We can make them go boom." After the forges, we spent some time at the Canoe Lake with Annabeth. She was really glad to see Tyson, but I could tell she was distracted. She kept looking over at the forest, like she was thinking about Grover's problem with the council. I couldn't blame her. Grover was nowhere to be seen, and I felt really bad for him. Finding the lost god Pan had been his lifelong goal. His father and his uncle had both disappeared following the same dream. Last winter, Grover had heard a voice in his head. "I await you." A voice he was sure belonged to Pan, but apparently his search had led nowhere. If the council took away his searcher's license now, it would crush him. "What's this other way?" I asked Annabeth. "The thing Clarice mentioned." She picked up a stone and skipped it across the lake. "Something Clarice scouted out. I helped her a little this spring. But it would be dangerous. Especially for Grover." "Goat Boy scares me," Tyson murmured. I stared at him. Tyson had faced down fire-breathing bulls and sea monsters and cannibal giants. "Why would you be scared of Grover?" "Hooves and horns," Tyson muttered nervously. "And goat fur makes my nose itchy." And that pretty much ended our Grover conversation. Before dinner, Tyson and I went down to the sword arena. Quintus was glad to have company. He still wouldn't tell me what was in the wooden crates, but he did teach me a few sword moves. The guy was good. He fought the way some people play chess, like he was putting all the moves together and you couldn't see the pattern until he made the last stroke and won with a sword at your throat. "Good try," he told me, "but your guard is too low." He lunged and I blocked. "Have you always been a swordsman?" I asked. He parried my overhead cut. "I've been many things." He jabbed and I sidestepped. His shoulder strap slipped down, and I saw that mark on his neck, the purple blotch. But it wasn't a random mark. It had a definite shape. A bird with folded wings, like a quail or something. "What's that on your neck?" I asked, which was probably a rude question, but you can blame my ADHD. I tend to just blurt things out. Quintus lost his rhythm. I hit his sword hilt and knocked the blade out of his hand. He rubbed his fingers. Then he shifted his armor to hide the mark. It wasn't a tattoo, I realized. It was an old burn, like he'd been branded. A reminder. He picked up his sword and forced a smile. "Now, shall we go again?" He pressed me hard, not giving me time for any more questions. While he and I fought, Tyson played with Mrs. O'Leary, who he called the little doggy. They had a great time wrestling for the bronze shield and playing Get the Greek. By sunset, Quintus hadn't even broken a sweat, which seemed kind of strange. But Tyson and I were hot and stick, so we hit the showers and got ready for dinner. I was feeling good. It was almost like a normal day at camp. Then dinner came, and all the campers lined up by cabin and marched into the dining pavilion. Most of them ignored the sealed fissure in the marble floor at the entrance, a 10-foot-long jagged scar that hadn't been there last summer, but I was careful to step over it. "Big crack," Tyson said when we were at our table. "Earthquake, maybe?" "No," I said. "Not an earthquake." I wasn't sure I should tell him. It was a secret only Annabeth and Grover and I knew. But looking in Tyson's big eye, I knew I couldn't hide it from him. "Nico D'Angelo," I said, lowering my voice. "He's this half-blood kid we brought to camp last winter. He asked me to guard his sister on a quest. And I failed. She died. Now he blames me." Tyson frowned. "So he put a crack in the floor. These skeletons attacked us," I said. "Nico told him to go away, and the ground just opened up and swallowed them." "Nico?" I looked around to make sure no one was listening. Nico is a son of Hades. Tyson nodded thoughtfully. The god of dead people. Yeah. So the Nico boy is gone now? I guess. I tried to search for him this spring. So did Annabeth. But we didn't have any luck. This is secret, Tyson. Okay. If anyone found out he was a son of Hades, he would be in danger. You can't even tell Chiron. The bad prophecy, Tyson said. Titans might use him if they knew. I stared at him. Sometimes it was easy to forget that as big and childlike as he was, Tyson was pretty smart. He knew that the next child of the big three gods, Zeus, Poseidon, or Hades, who turned 16 was prophesied to either save or destroy Mount Olympus. Most people assumed that meant me, but if I died before I turned 16, the prophecy could just as easily apply to Nico. Exactly, I said. So, mouth sealed, Tyson promised. Like the crack in the ground. I had trouble falling asleep that night. I lay in bed listening to the waves on the beach, and the owls and monsters in the woods. I was afraid once I drifted off I'd have nightmares. See, for half-bloods, dreams are hardly ever just dreams. We get messages. We glimpse things that are happening to our friends or enemies. Sometimes, we even glimpse the past or the future. And at camp, my dreams were always more frequent and vivid. So I was still awake around midnight, staring at the bunk bed mattress above me, when I realized there was a strange light in the room. The saltwater fountain was glowing. I threw off the covers and walked cautiously toward it. Steam rose from the hot salt water. Rainbow colors shimmered through it, though there was no light in the room except for the moon outside. Then a pleasant, female voice spoke from the steam. Please deposit 1 drachma. I looked over at Tyson, but he was still snoring. He sleeps about as heavily as a tranquilized elephant. I didn't know what to think. I'd never gotten a colicked iris message before. 1 golden drachma gleamed at the bottom of the fountain. I scooped it up and tossed it through the mist. The coin vanished. Oh, Iris, goddess of the rainbow, I whispered. Show me, whatever you need to show me. The mist shimmered. I saw the dark shore of a river. Wisps of fog drifted across black water. The beach was strewn with jagged volcanic rock. A young boy squatted at the riverbank, tending a campfire. The flames burned an unnatural blue color. Then I saw the boy's face. It was Nico D'Angelo. He was throwing pieces of paper into the fire, mythomagic trading cards, part of the game he'd been obsessed with last winter. Nico was only 10, or maybe 11 by now, but he looked older. His hair had grown longer. It was shaggy and almost touched his shoulders. His eyes were dark. His olive skin had turned paler. He wore ripped black jeans and a battered aviator's jacket that was several sizes too big, unzipped over a black shirt. His face was grimy, his eyes a little wild. He looked like a kid who'd been living on the streets. I waited for him to look at me. No doubt, he'd get crazy angry, start accusing me of letting his sister die. But he didn't seem to notice me. I stayed quiet, not daring to move. If he hadn't sent this iris message, who had? Nico tossed another trading card into the blue flames. Useless, he muttered. I can't believe I ever liked this stuff. A childish game, master, another voice agreed. It seemed to come from near the fire, but I couldn't see who was talking. Nico stared across the river. On the far shore was black beach shrouded in haze. I recognized it. The underworld. Nico was camping at the edge of the river Styx. I've failed, he muttered. There's no way to get her back. The other voice kept silent. Nico turned toward it doubtfully. Is there? Speak. Something shimmered. I thought it was just firelight. Then I realized it was the form of a man. A wisp of blue smoke. A shadow. If you looked at him head-on, he wasn't there. But if you looked out of the corner of your eye, you could make out his shape. A ghost. It has never been done, the ghost said. But there may be a way. Tell me, Nico commanded. His eyes shined with a fierce light. An exchange, the ghost said. A soul for a soul. I've offered, not yours. The ghost said, you cannot offer your father a soul he will eventually collect anyway. Nor will he be anxious for the death of his son. I mean a soul that should have died already. Someone who has cheated death. Nico's face darkened. Not that again. You're talking about murder. I'm talking about justice, the ghost said. Vengeance. Those are not the same thing. The ghost laughed dryly. You will learn differently as you get older. Nico stared at the flames. Why can't I at least summon her? I want to talk to her. She would help me. I will help you, the ghost promised. Have I not saved you many times? Did I not lead you through the maze and teach you to use your powers? Do you want revenge for your sister? Or not? I didn't like the ghost's tone of voice. He reminded me of a kid at my old school. A bully who used to convince other kids to do stupid things like steal lab equipment and vandalize the teachers' cars. The bully never got in trouble himself, but he got tons of other kids suspended. Nico turned from the fire so the ghost couldn't see him, but I could. A tear traced its way down his face. Very well. You have a plan? Oh, yes, the ghost said, sounding quite pleased. We have many dark roads to travel. We must start. The image shimmered. Nico vanished. The woman's voice from the mist said, please deposit 1 drachma for another 5 minutes. There were no other coins in the fountain. I grabbed for my pockets, but I was wearing pajamas. I lunged for the nightstand to check for spare change, but the iris message had already blinked out, and the room went dark again. The connection was broken. I stood in the middle of the cabin, listening to the gurgle of the saltwater fountain and the ocean waves outside. Nico was alive. He was trying to bring his sister back from the dead. And I had a feeling I knew what soul he wanted to exchange, someone who had cheated death. Vengeance. Nico D'Angelo would come looking for me. Chapter 3. We played tag with scorpions. The next morning there was a lot of excitement at breakfast. Apparently around 3 in the morning an Ethiopian draken had been spotted at the borders of camp. I was so exhausted I slept right through the noise. The magical boundaries had kept the monster out, but it prowled the hills, looking for weak spots in our defenses, and it didn't seem anxious to go away until Lee Fletcher from Apollo's cabin led a couple of his siblings in pursuit. After a few dozen arrows lodged in the chinks of the dracon's armor, it got the message and withdrew. It's still out there, Lee warned us during announcements. 20 arrows in its hide, and we just made it mad. The thing was 30 feet long and bright green. Its eyes. He shuddered. You did well, Lee. Chiron patted him on the shoulder. Everyone stay alert, but stay calm. This has happened before. Quintus said from the head table. And it will happen again. More and more frequently. The campers murmured among themselves. Everyone knew the rumors. Luke and his army of monsters were planning an invasion of the camp. Most of us expected it to happen this summer, but no one knew how or when. It didn't help that our attendance was down. We only had about 80 campers. 3 years ago, when I'd started, there had been more than 100. Some had died. Some had joined Luke. Some had just disappeared. This is a good reason for new war games, Quintus continued, a glint in his eyes. We'll see how you all do with that tonight. Yes, Chiron said. Well, enough announcements. Let us bless this meal and eat. He raised his goblet to the gods. We all raised our glasses and repeated the blessing. Tyson and I took our plates to the bronze brazier and scraped a portion of our food into the flames. I hoped the gods liked raisin toast and Fruit Loops. Poseidon, I said. Then I whispered, help me with Nico, and Luke, and Grover's problem. There was so much to worry about I could have stood there all morning, but I headed back to the table. Once everyone was eating, Chiron and Grover came over to visit. Grover was bleary-eyed. His shirt was inside out. He slid his plate onto the table and slumped next to me. Tyson shifted uncomfortably. I will go. Polish my fish ponies. He lumbered off, leaving his breakfast half-eaten. Chiron tried for a smile. He probably wanted to look reassuring, but in centaur form he towered over me, casting a shadow across the table. Well, Percy, how did you sleep? Fine. I wondered why he asked that. Was it possible he knew something about the weird iris message I'd gotten? I brought Grover over, Chiron said, because I thought you two might want to discuss matters. Now if you'll excuse me, I have some iris messages to send. I'll see you later in the day. He gave Grover a meaningful look, then trotted out of the pavilion. What's he talking about? I asked Grover. Grover chewed his eggs. I could tell he was distracted, because he bit the tines of his fork and chewed those down, too. He wants you to convince me, he mumbled. Somebody else slid next to me on the bench. Annabeth. I'll tell you what it's about, she said. The labyrinth. It was hard to concentrate on what she was saying, because everybody in the dining pavilion was stealing glances at us and whispering. And Annabeth was right next to me. I mean right next to me. You're not supposed to be here, I said. We need to talk, she insisted. But the rules. She knew as well as I did that campers weren't allowed to switch tables. Satyrs were different. They weren't really demigods. But the half-bloods had to sit with their cabins. I wasn't even sure what the punishment was for switching tables. I'd never seen it happen. If Mr. D had been here, he probably would've strangled Annabeth with magical grapevines or something, but Mr. D wasn't here. Chiron had already left the pavilion. Quintus looked over and raised an eyebrow, but he didn't say anything. Look, Annabeth said, Grover is in trouble. There's only one way we can figure to help him. It's the labyrinth. That's what Clarice and I have been investigating. I shifted my weight, trying to think clearly. You mean the maze where they kept the Minotaur, back in the old days? Exactly, Annabeth said. So, It's not under the king's palace in Crete anymore, I guessed. The labyrinth is under some building in America. See, it only took me a few years to figure things out. I knew that important places moved around with Western civilization, like Mount Olympus being over the Empire State Building, and the underworld entrance being in Los Angeles. I was feeling pretty proud of myself. Annabeth rolled her eyes. Under a building? Please, Percy. The labyrinth is huge. It wouldn't fit under a single city, much less a single building. I thought about my dream of Nico at the river Styx. So, is the labyrinth part of the underworld? No. Annabeth frowned. Well, there may be passages from the labyrinth down into the underworld. I'm not sure, but the underworld is way down. The labyrinth is right under the surface of the mortal world, kind of like a second skin. It's been growing for thousands of years, lacing its way under Western cities, connecting everything together. Underground. You can get anywhere through the labyrinth. If you don't get lost, Grover muttered, and die a horrible death. Grover, there has to be a way, Annabeth said. I got the feeling they'd had this conversation before. Clarice lived. Barely, Grover said. And the other guy, he was driven insane. He didn't die. Oh, joy. Grover's lower lip quivered. That makes me feel much better. Whoa. I said. Back up. What's this about Clarice and a crazy guy? Annabeth glanced over toward the Aries table. Clarice was watching us like she knew what we were talking about, but then she fixed her eyes on her breakfast plate. Last year, Annabeth said, lowering her voice, Clarice went on a mission for Chiron. I remember, I said. It was secret. Annabeth nodded. Despite how serious she was acting, I was happy she wasn't mad at me anymore. And I kind of liked the fact that she'd broken the rules to come sit next to me. It was secret, Annabeth agreed, because she found Chris Rodriguez, the guy from the Hermes cabin. I remembered him from 2 years ago. We'd eavesdropped on Chris Rodriguez aboard Luke's ship, the Princess Andromeda. Chris was one of the half-bloods who'd abandoned camp and joined the Titan army. Yeah, Annabeth said. Last summer he just appeared in Phoenix, Arizona, near Clarissa's mom's house. What do you mean he just appeared? He was wandering around the desert, in 120 degrees, in full Greek armor, babbling about string. String, I said. He'd been driven completely insane. Clarice brought him back to her mom's house so the mortals wouldn't institutionalize him. She tried to nurse him back to health. Chiron came out and interviewed him. But it wasn't much good. The only thing they got out of him, Luke's men have been exploring the labyrinth. I shivered, though I wasn't exactly sure why. Poor Chris. He hadn't been a bad guy. What could have driven him mad? I looked at Grover, who was chewing up the rest of his fork. Okay, I asked. Why were they exploring the labyrinth? We weren't sure. Annabeth said. That's why Clarice went on a scouting expedition. Chiron kept things hushed up because he didn't want anyone panicking. He got me involved because, well, the labyrinth has always been one of my favorite subjects. The architecture involved. Her expression turned a little dreamy. The builder, Daedalus, was a genius. But the point is, the labyrinth has entrances everywhere. If Luke could figure out how to navigate it, he could move his army around with incredible speed. Except it's a maze, right? Full of horrible traps, Grover agreed. Dead ends, illusions, psychotic goat-killing monsters. But not if you had Ariadne's string, Annabeth said. In the old days, Ariadne's string guided Theseus out of the maze. It was a navigation instrument of some kind, invented by Daedalus. And Chris Rodriguez was mumbling about string. So Luke is trying to find Ariadne's string, I said. Why, what's he planning? Annabeth shook her head. I don't know. I thought maybe he wanted to invade camp through the maze, but that doesn't make any sense. The closest entrances Clarice found were in Manhattan, which wouldn't help Luke get past our borders. Clarice explored a little way into the tunnels, but it was very dangerous. She had some close calls. I researched everything I could find about Daedalus. I'm afraid it didn't help much. I don't understand exactly what Luke's planning, but I do know this: the labyrinth might be the key to Grover's problem. I blinked. You think Pan is underground? It would explain why he's been impossible to find. Grover shuddered. Satyrs hate going underground. No searcher would ever try going in that place. No flowers, no sunshine, no coffee shops. But, Annabeth said, the labyrinth can lead you almost anywhere. It reads your thoughts. It was designed to fool you, trick you and kill you. But if you can make the labyrinth work for you, it could lead you to the wild god. I said. I can't do it. Grover hugged his stomach. Just thinking about it makes me want to throw up my silverware. Grover, it may be your last chance, Annabeth said. The council is serious. 1 week or you learn to tap dance. Over at the head table, Quintus cleared his throat. I got the feeling he didn't want to make a scene, but Annabeth was really pushing it. Sitting at my table so long. We'll talk later. Annabeth squeezed my arm a little too hard. Convince him, will you? She returned to the Athena table, ignoring all the people who were staring at her. Grover buried his head in his hands. I can't do it, Percy. My searcher's license. Pan. I'm going to lose it all. I'll have to start a puppet theater. Don't say that. We'll figure something out. He looked at me teary-eyed. Percy, you're my best friend. You've seen me underground. In that Cyclops' cave. Do you really think I could? His voice faltered. I remembered the Sea of Monsters, when he'd been stuck in a Cyclops' cave. He'd never liked underground places to begin with, but now Grover really hated them. Cyclopes gave him the creeps, too. Even Tyson. Grover tried to hide it, but Grover and I could sort of read each other's emotions because of this empathy link between us. I knew how he felt. Grover was terrified of the big guy. I have to leave, Grover said miserably. Juniper's waiting for me. It's a good thing she finds cowards attractive. After he was gone, I looked over at Quintus. He nodded gravely, like we were sharing some dark secret. Then he went back to cutting his sausage with a dagger. In the afternoon, I went down to the Pegasus stables to visit my friend Blackjack. Yo, boss. He capered around in his stall, his black wings buffeting the air. Yeah, bring me some sugar cubes. You know those aren't good for you, Blackjack. Yeah. So you brought me some, huh? I smiled and fed him a handful. Blackjack and I went back a long way. I sort of helped rescue him from Luke's demon cruise ship a few years ago, and ever since, he insisted on repaying Me with favors. So we got any quests coming up? Blackjack asked. I'm ready to fly, boss. I patted his nose. Not sure. Man, everybody keeps talking about underground mazes. Blackjack whinnied nervously. Not for this horse. You ain't gonna be crazy enough to go in no maze, boss. Yeah, you'll end up in the glue factory. You may be right, Blackjack. We'll see. Blackjack crunched down his sugar cubes. He shook his mane like he was having a sugar seizure. Whoa, good stuff. Well, boss, you come to your senses and want to fly somewhere, just give a whistle. Oh, Blackjack and his buddies, we'll stampede anybody for ya. I told him I'd keep it in mind. Then, a group of younger campers came into the stables to start their riding lessons, and I decided it was time to leave. I had a bad feeling I wasn't going to see Blackjack for a long time. That night after dinner, Quintus had us suit up in combat armor like we were getting ready for capture the flag, but the mood among the campers was a lot more serious. Sometime during the day the crates in the arena had disappeared, and I had a feeling whatever was in them had been emptied into the woods. Right, Quintus said, standing on the head dining table. Gather round. He was dressed in black leather and bronze. In the torchlight, his grey hair made him look like a ghost. Mrs. O'Leary bounded happily around him, foraging for dinner scraps. You will be in teams of 2, Quintus announced. When everybody started talking and trying to grab their friends, he yelled, "Which have already been chosen." Everybody complained. Your goal is simple. Collect the gold laurels without dying. The wreath is wrapped in a silk package, tied to the back of one of the monsters. There are 6 monsters. Each has a silk package. Only one holds the laurels. You must find the wreath before the other teams. And, of course, you will have to slay the monster to get it, and stay alive. The crowd started murmuring excitedly. The task sounded pretty straightforward. Hey, we'd all slain monsters before. That's what we trained for. I will now announce your partners, Quintus said. There will be no trading. No switching. No complaining. A roof. Mrs. O'Leary buried her face in a plate of pizza. Quintus produced a big scroll and started reading off names. Beckendorf would be with Silena. Beauregard, which Beckendorf looked pretty happy about. The Stoll brothers, Travis and Connor, would be together. No surprise. They did everything together. Clarice was with Lee Fletcher from the Apollo cabin. Melee and ranged combat combined, they would be a tough combo to beat. Quintus kept rattling off the names until he said, Percy Jackson with Annabeth Chase. Nice. I grinned at Annabeth. Your armor is crooked, was her only comment, and she redid my straps for me. Grover Underwood, Quintus said, with Tyson. Grover just about jumped out of his goat fur. What? Beebit? No. Tyson whimpered. Must be a mistake. Goat boy. No complaining. Quintus ordered. Get with your partner. You have 2 minutes to prepare. Tyson and Grover both looked at me pleadingly. I tried to give them an encouraging nod and gestured that they should move together. Tyson sneezed. Grover started chewing nervously on his wooden club. They'll be fine, Annabeth said. Come on, let's worry about how we're going to stay alive. It was still light when we got into the woods, but the shadows from the Trees made it feel like midnight. It was cold, too, even in summer. Annabeth and I found tracks. Almost immediately scuttling marks made by something with a lot of legs. We began to follow the trail. We jumped a creek and heard some twigs snapping nearby. We crouched behind a boulder, but it was only the Stoll brothers tripping through the woods and cursing. Their dad was the god of thieves, but they were about as stealthy as buffaloes. Once the Stolls had passed, we forged deeper into the west woods where the monsters were wilder. We were standing on a ledge overlooking a marshy pond when Annabeth tensed. This is where we stopped looking. It took me a second to realize what she meant. Last winter, when we'd given up hope of finding him, Grover, Annabeth and I had stood on this rock, and I'd convinced them not to tell Chiron the truth, that Nico was a son of Hades. At the time it seemed the right thing to do. I wanted to protect his identity. I wanted to be the one to find him and make things right for what had happened to his sister. Now, 6 months later, I hadn't even come close to finding him. It left a bitter taste in my mouth. "I saw him last night," I said. Annabeth knit her eyebrows. "What do you mean?" I told her about the iris message. When I was done, she stared into the shadows of the woods. "He's summoning the dead? That's not good." "The ghost was giving him bad advice," I said. "Telling him to take revenge." "Yeah. Spirits are never good advisors. They've got their own agendas, old grudges, and they resent the living. He's going to come after me," I said. "The spirit mentioned a maze." She nodded. "That settles it. We have to figure out the labyrinth." "Maybe," I said uncomfortably. "But who sent the iris message? If Nico didn't know I was there." A branch snapped in the woods. Dry leaves rustled. Something large was moving in the trees, just beyond the ridge. "That's not the Stoll brothers," Annabeth whispered. Together we drew our swords. We got to Zeus's fist, a huge pile of boulders in the middle of the West Woods. It was a natural landmark where campers often rendezvoused on hunting expeditions, but now there was nobody around. "Over there," Annabeth whispered. "No. Wait," I said. "Behind us." It was weird. Scuttling noises seemed to be coming from several different directions. We were circling the boulders, our swords drawn, when someone right behind us said, "Hi." We whirled around, and the tree nymph Juniper yelped. "Put those down," she protested. "Dryads don't like sharp blades, okay?" "Juniper," Annabeth exhaled. "What are you doing here?" "I live here." I lowered my sword. "In the boulders?" She pointed toward the edge of the clearing. "In the juniper." Duh. It made sense, and I felt kind of stupid. I'd been hanging around dryads for years, but I never really talked to them much. I knew they couldn't go very far away from their tree, which was the source of life. But I didn't know much else. "Are you guys busy?" Juniper asked. "Well," I said, "we're in the middle of this game against a bunch of monsters and we're trying not to die." "We're not busy," Annabeth said. "What's wrong?" Juniper sniffled. She wiped her silky sleeve under her eyes. "It's Grover. He seems so distraught. All year he's been out looking for Pan. And every time he comes back, it's worse." I thought maybe, at first, he was seeing another tree. "No," Annabeth said as Juniper started crying. "I'm sure that's not it. He had a crush on a blueberry bush once, Juniper said miserably. Juniper? Annabeth said. Grover would never even look at another tree. He's just stressed out about his searcher's license. He can't go underground, she protested. You can't let him. Annabeth looked uncomfortable. It might be the only way to help him. If we just knew where to start. Juniper wiped a green tear off her cheek. About that, another rustle in the woods, and Juniper yelled, "Hide!" Before I could ask why, she went poof into green mist. Annabeth and I turned. Coming out of the woods was a glistening amber insect, 10 feet long, with jagged pincers, an armored tail, and a stinger as long as my sword. A scorpion. Tied to its back was a red silk package. One of us gets behind it, Annabeth said, as the thing clattered toward us. Cuts off its tail while the other distracts it in front. I'll take point, I said. You've got the invisibility hat. She nodded. We'd fought together so many times we knew each other's moves. We could do this. Easy. But it all went wrong when the other 2 scorpions appeared from the woods. 3. Annabeth said. That's not possible. The whole woods, and half the monsters come at us. I swallowed. 1. We could take 2. With a little luck. 3. Doubtful. The scorpions scurried toward us, whipping their barbed tails like they'd come here just to kill us. Annabeth and I put our backs against the nearest boulder. Climb, I said. No time, she said. She was right. The scorpions were already surrounding us. They were so close I could see their hideous mouths foaming, anticipating an ice-juicy meal of demigods. Look out! Annabeth parried away a stinger with the flat of her blade. I stabbed with Riptide, but the scorpion backed out of range. We clambered sideways along the boulders, but the scorpions followed us. I slashed at another one. But going on the offensive was too dangerous. If I went for the body, the tail stabbed downward. If I went for the tail, the thing's pincers came from either side and tried to grab me. All we could do was defend, and we wouldn't be able to keep that up for very long. I took another step sideways, and suddenly there was nothing behind me. It was a crack between 2 of the largest boulders, something I'd passed by 1,000,000 times, but in here, I said. Annabeth sliced at a scorpion, then looked at me like I was crazy. In there? It's too narrow. I'll cover you. Go. She ducked behind me and started squeezing between the 2 boulders. Then she yelped and grabbed my armor straps, and suddenly I was tumbling into a pit that hadn't been there a moment before. I could see the scorpions above us, the purple evening sky and the trees, and then the hole shut like the lens of a camera, and we were in complete darkness. Our breathing echoed against stone. It was wet and cold. I was sitting on a bumpy floor that seemed to be made of bricks. I lifted Riptide. The faint glow of the blade was just enough to illuminate Annabeth's frightened face and the mossy stone walls on either side of us. Where are we? Annabeth said. Safe from the scorpions, anyway. I tried to sound calm, but I was freaking out. The crack between the boulders couldn't have led into a cave. I would have known if there was a cave here. I was sure of it. It was like the ground had opened up and swallowed us. All I could think of was the fissure in the dining room pavilion, where those skeletons had been consumed last summer. I wondered if the same thing had happened to us. I lifted my sword again for light. It's a long room, I muttered. Annabeth gripped my arm. "It's not a room. It's a corridor." She was right. The darkness felt emptier in front of us. There was a warm breeze, like in subway tunnels. Only it felt older, more dangerous somehow. I started forward, but Annabeth stopped me. "Don't take another step," she warned. "We need to find the exit." She sounded really scared now. "It's okay," I promised. "It's right." I looked up and realized I couldn't see where we'd fallen in. The ceiling was solid stone. The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions. Annabeth's hand slipped into mine. Under different circumstances I would have been embarrassed, but here in the dark I was glad to know where she was. It was about the only thing I was sure of. "2 steps back," she advised. We stepped backward together like we were in a minefield. "Okay," she said. "Help me examine the walls." "What for?" "The mark of Daedalus," she said, as if that was supposed to make sense. Okay. What kind of?" "Got it," she said with relief. She set her hand on the wall and pressed against a tiny fissure, which began to glow blue. A Greek symbol appeared. Increment, the ancient Greek delta. The roof slid open and we saw night sky, stars blazing. It was a lot darker than it should have been. Metal ladder rungs appeared in the side of the wall, leading up, and I could hear people yelling our names. "Percy, Annabeth." Tyson's voice bellowed the loudest, but others were calling out, too. I looked nervously at Annabeth. Then we began to climb. We made our way around the rocks and ran into Clarice and a bunch of other campers carrying torches. "Where have you two been?" Clarice demanded. "We've been looking forever, but we were gone only a few minutes," I said. Chiron trotted up, followed by Tyson and Grover. "Percy," Tyson said. "You are okay?" "We're fine," I said. "We fell in a hole." The others looked at me skeptically, then at Annabeth. "Honest," I said. "There were 3 scorpions after us, so we ran and hid in the rocks. But we were only gone a minute." "You've been missing for almost an hour," Chiron said. "The game is over." "Yeah," Grover muttered. "We would have won, but a cyclops sat on me." "Was an accident," Tyson protested, and then he sneezed. Clarice was wearing the gold laurels, but she didn't even brag about winning them, which wasn't like her. "A hole?" she said suspiciously. Annabeth took a deep breath. She looked around at the other campers. "Chiron, maybe we should talk about this at the big house." Clarice gasped. "You found it, didn't you?" Annabeth bit her lip. Yeah, we did." A bunch of campers started asking questions, looking about as confused as I was, but Chiron raised his hand for silence. "Tonight is not the right time, and this is not the right place." He stared at boulders as if he'd just noticed how dangerous they were. "All of you, back to your cabins. Get some sleep. A game well played, but curfew is past." There was a lot of mumbling and complaints, but the campers drifted off, talking among themselves and giving me suspicious looks. "This explains a lot," Clarice said. "It explains what Luke is after." "Wait a second," I said. "What do you mean? What did we find?" Annabeth turned toward me, her eyes dark with worry. "An entrance to the labyrinth. An invasion route straight into the heart of the camp." Chapter 4 Annabeth breaks the rules. Chiron had insisted we talk about it in the morning, which was kind of like, "Hey, Your life's in mortal danger. Sleep tight." It was hard to fall asleep, but when I finally did, I dreamed of a prison. I saw a boy in a Greek tunic and sandals crouching alone in a massive stone room. The ceiling was open to the night sky, but the walls were 20 feet high and polished marble, completely smooth. Scattered around the room were wooden crates. Some were cracked and tipped over, as if they'd been flung in there. Bronze tools spilled out of one, a compass, a saw, and a bunch of other things I didn't recognize. The boy huddled in the corner, shivering from cold, or maybe fear. He was spattered in mud. His legs, arms, and face were scraped up as if he'd been dragged here along with the boxes. Then the double oak doors moaned open. 2 guards in bronze armor marched in, holding an old man between them. They flung him to the floor in a battered heap. "Father!" The boy ran to him. The man's robes were in tatters. His hair was streaked with gray, and his beard was long and curly. His nose had been broken. His lips were bloody. The boy took the old man's head in his arms. "What did they do to you?" Then he yelled at the guards. "I'll kill you. There will be no killing today," a voice said. The guards moved aside. Behind them stood a tall man in white robes. He wore a thin circlet of gold on his head. His beard was pointed like a spear blade. His eyes glittered cruelly. "You helped the Athenian kill my Minotaur, Daedalus. You turned my one daughter against me. You did that yourself, Your Majesty," the old man croaked. A guard planted a kick in the old man's ribs. He groaned in agony. The young boy cried, "Stop. You love your maize so much," the king said. "I have decided to let you stay here. This will be your workshop. Make me new wonders. Amuse me. Every maze needs a monster. You will be mine. I don't fear you," the old man groaned. The king smiled coldly. He locked his eyes on the boy. "But a man cares about his son. Displease me, old man, and the next time my guards inflict a punishment, it will be on him." The king swept out of the room with his guards, and the doors slammed shut, leaving the boy and his father alone in the darkness. "What shall we do?" the boy moaned. "Father, they will kill you." The old man swallowed with difficulty. He tried to smile, but it was a gruesome sight with his bloody mouth. "Take heart, my son." He gazed up at the stars. I will find a way." A bar lowered across the doors with a fatal boom, and I woke in a cold sweat. I was still feeling shaky the next morning when Chiron called a war council. We met in the sword arena, which I thought was pretty strange, trying to discuss the fate of the camp while Mrs. O'Leary chewed on a life-size squeaky pink rubber yak. Chiron and Quintus stood at the front by the weapon racks. Clarice and Annabeth sat next to each other and led the briefing. Tyson and Grover sat as far away from each other as possible. Also present around the table, Juniper the tree nymph, Silena Beauregard, Travis and Connor Stoll, Beckendorf, Lee Fletcher, even Argus, our 100-eyed security chief. That's how I knew it was serious. Argus hardly ever shows up unless something really major is going on. The whole time Annabeth spoke, he kept his 100 blue eyes trained on her so hard his whole body turned bloodshot. "Luke must have known about the Labyrinth entrance," Annabeth said. "He knew everything about camp." I thought I heard a little pride in her voice, like she still respected the guy, evil as he was. Juniper cleared her throat. That's what I was trying to tell you last night. The cave entrance has been there a long time. Luke used to use it. Silena. Beauregard frowned. You knew about the labyrinth entrance, and you didn't say anything? Juniper's face turned green. I didn't know it was important. Just a cave. I don't like yucky old caves. She has good taste, Grover said. I wouldn't have paid any attention. Except, well, it was Luke. She blushed a little greener. Grover huffed. Forget what I said about good taste. Interesting. Quintus polished his sword as he spoke. And you believe this young man, Luke, would dare use the labyrinth as an invasion route? Definitely, Clarice said. If he could get an army of monsters inside Camp Half-Blood, just pop up in the middle of the woods without having to worry about our magical boundaries, we wouldn't stand a chance. He could wipe us out easy. He must have been planning this for months. He's been sending scouts into the maze, Annabeth said. We know because we found one. Chris Rodriguez, Chiron said. He gave Quintus a meaningful look. Ah, Quintus said. The one in the… Yes, I understand. The one in the what? I asked. Clarice glared at me. The point is, Luke has been looking for a way to navigate the maze. He's searching for Daedalus's workshop. I remembered my dream the night before. The bloody old man in tattered robes. The guy who created the maze. Yes, Annabeth said. The greatest architect, the greatest inventor of all time. If the legends are true, his workshop is in the center of the labyrinth. He's the only one who knew how to navigate the maze perfectly. If Luke managed to find the workshop and convince Daedalus to help him, Luke wouldn't have to fumble around searching for paths, or risk losing his army in the maze's traps. He could navigate anywhere he wanted, quickly and safely. First to Camp Half-Blood to wipe us out. Then, to Olympus. The arena was silent except for Mrs. O'Leary's toy yak getting disemboweled. Squeak. Squeak. Finally Beckendorf put his huge hands on the table. Back up a sec. Annabeth, you said. Convince Daedalus. Isn't Daedalus dead? Quintus grunted. I would hope so. He lived, what, 3,000 years ago? And even if he were alive, don't the old stories say he fled from the labyrinth? Chiron clopped restlessly on his hooves. That's the problem, my dear Quintus. No one knows. There are rumors, well, there are many disturbing rumors about Daedalus. But one is that he disappeared back into the labyrinth toward the end of his life. He might still be there. I thought about the old man I'd seen in my dreams. He'd looked so frail, it was hard to believe he'd lasted another week, much less 3,000 years. We need to go in, Annabeth announced. We have to find the workshop before Luke does. If Daedalus is alive, we convince him to help us, not Luke. If Ariadne's string still exists, we make sure it never falls into Luke's hands. Wait a second, I said. If we're worried about an attack, why not just blow up the entrance? Seal the tunnel? Great idea, Grover said. I'll get the dynamite. It's not so easy, stupid, Clarice growled. We tried that at the entrance we found in Phoenix. It didn't go well. Annabeth nodded. The labyrinth is magical architecture, Percy. It would take huge power to seal even one of its entrances. In Phoenix, Clarus demolished a whole building with a wrecking ball, and the maze entrance just shifted a few feet. The best we can do is prevent Luke from learning to navigate the labyrinth. We could fight, Lee Fletcher said. We know where the entrance is now. We can set up a defensive line and wait for them. If an army tries to come through, they'll find us waiting with our bows. We will certainly set up defenses, Chiron agreed. But I fear Clarus is right. The magical borders have kept this camp safe for hundreds of years. If Luke manages to get a large army of monsters into the center of camp, bypassing our boundaries, we may not have the strength to defeat them. Nobody looked real happy about that news. Chiron usually tried to be upbeat and optimistic. If he was predicting we couldn't hold off an attack, that wasn't good. We have to get to Daedalus's workshop first, Annabeth insisted. Find Ariadne's string and prevent Luke from using it. But if nobody can navigate in there, I said, what chance do we have? I've been studying architecture for years, she said. I know Daedalus's labyrinth better than anybody. From reading about it. Well, yes. That's not enough. It has to be. It isn't. Are you going to help me or not? I realized. Everyone was watching Annabeth and me like a tennis match. Mrs. O'Leary's squeaky yak went eek as she ripped off its pink rubber head. Chiron cleared his throat. First things first. We need a quest. Someone must enter the labyrinth, find the workshop of Daedalus, and prevent Luke from using the maze to invade this camp. We all know who should lead this, Clarus said. Annabeth. There was a murmur of agreement. I knew Annabeth had been waiting for her own quest since she was a little kid, but she looked uncomfortable. You've done as much as I have. Clarus, she said. You should go, too. Clarus shook her head. I'm not going back in there. Travis Stoll laughed. Don't tell me you're scared. Clarus. Chicken? Clarus got to her feet. I thought she was going to pulverize Travis, but she said in a shaky voice. You don't understand anything, punk. I'm never going in there again. Never. She stormed out of the arena. Travis looked around sheepishly. I didn't mean to. Chiron raised his hand. The poor girl has had a difficult year. Now, do we have agreement that Annabeth should lead the quest? We all nodded except Quintus. He folded his arms and stared at the table. But I wasn't sure anyone else noticed. Very well. Chiron turned to Annabeth. My dear, it's your time to visit the oracle. Assuming you return to us in one piece, we shall discuss what to do next. Waiting for Annabeth was harder than visiting the oracle myself. I'd heard it speak prophecies twice before. The first time had been in the dusty attic of the big house, where the spirit of Delphi slept inside the body of a mummified hippie lady. The second time, the oracle had come out for a little stroll in the woods. I still had nightmares about that. I'd never felt threatened by the oracle's presence, but I'd heard stories, campers who'd gone insane, or who'd seen visions so real they died of fear. I paced the arena, waiting. Mrs. O'Leary ate her lunch, which consisted of 100 pounds of ground beef and several dog biscuits the size of trash can lids. I wondered where Quintus got dog biscuits that size. I didn't figure you could just walk into Pet Zone and put those in your shopping cart. Chiron was deep in conversation with Quintus and Argus. It looked to me like they were disagreeing about something. Quintus kept shaking his head. On the other side of the arena, Tyson and the Stoll brothers were racing miniature bronze chariots that Tyson had made out of armor scraps. I gave up on pacing and left the arena. I stared across the fields at the big house's attic window, dark and still. What was taking Annabeth so long? I was pretty sure it hadn't taken me this long to get my quest. Percy, a girl, whispered. Juniper was standing in the bushes. It was weird how she almost turned invisible when she was surrounded by plants. She gestured me over urgently. You need to know. Luke wasn't the only one I saw around that cave. What do you mean? She glanced back at the arena. I was trying to say something, but he was right there. Who? The Swordmaster, she said. He was poking around the rocks. My stomach clenched. Quintus. When? I don't know. I don't pay attention to time. Maybe a week ago, when he first showed up. What was he doing? Did he go in? I'm not sure. He's creepy, Percy. I didn't even see him come into the glade. Suddenly he was just there. You have to tell Grover it's too dangerous. Juniper, Grover called from inside the arena. Where'd you go? Juniper sighed. I'd better go in. Just remember what I said. Don't trust that man. She ran into the arena. I stared at the big house, feeling more uneasy than ever. If Quintus was up to something, I needed Annabeth's advice. She might know what to make of Juniper's news. But where the heck was she? Whatever was happening with the Oracle, it shouldn't be taking this long. Finally I couldn't stand it anymore. It was against the rules, but then again, nobody was watching. I ran down the hill and headed across the fields. The front parlor of the big house was strangely quiet. I was used to seeing Dionysus by the fireplace, playing cards and eating grapes and griping at satyrs, but Mr. D was still away. I walked down the hallway, floorboards creaking under my feet. When I got to the base of the stairs, I hesitated. 4 floors above would be a little trapdoor leading to the attic. Annabeth would be up there somewhere. I stood quietly and listened. But what I heard wasn't what I had expected. Sobbing. And it was coming from below me. I crept around the back of the stairs. The basement door was open. I didn't even know the big house had a basement. I peered inside and saw 2 figures in the far corner, sitting amid a bunch of stockpiled cases of ambrosia and strawberry preserves. One was Clarice. The other was a teenage Hispanic guy in tattered camouflage pants and a dirty black t-shirt. His hair was greasy and matted. He was hugging his shoulders and sobbing. It was Chris Rodriguez, the half-blood who'd gone to work for Luke. "It's okay," Clarice was telling him. "Try a little more nectar. You're in illusion, Mary." Chris backed farther into the corner. Get away. My name's not Mary." Clarisse's voice was gentle but really sad. I never knew Clarice could sound that way. "My name is Clarice. Remember, please. It's dark," Chris yelled. "So dark. Come outside," Clarice coaxed. "The sunlight will help you. A 1,000 skulls. The earth keeps healing him." "Chris," Clarice pleaded. It sounded like she was close to tears. "You have to get better. Please. Mr. D will be back soon. He's an expert in madness. Just hang on." Chris's eyes were like a cornered rat's, wild and desperate. "There's no way out, Mary. No way out." Then he caught a glimpse of me and made a strangled, terrified sound. "The son of Poseidon. He's horrible. I backed away, hoping Clarice hadn't seen me. I listened for her to come charging out and yell at me, but instead she just kept talking to Chris in a sad pleading voice, trying to get him to drink the nectar. Maybe she thought it was part of Chris's hallucination, but, son of Poseidon, Chris had been looking at me, and yet why did I get the feeling he hadn't been talking about me at all? And Clarisse's tenderness, it had never even occurred to me that she might like someone, but the way she said Chris's name, she'd known him before he changed sides. She'd known him a lot better than I realized. And now he was shivering in a dark basement, afraid to come out, and mumbling about someone named Mary. No wonder Clarice didn't want anything to do with the labyrinth. What had happened to Chris in there? I heard a creak from above, like the attic door opening, and I ran for the front door. I needed to get out of that house. My dear, Chiron said. You made it. Annabeth looked at me. First, I couldn't tell if she was trying to warn me, or if the look in her eyes was just plain fear. Then she focused on Quintus. I got the prophecy. I will lead the quest to find Daedalus's workshop. Nobody cheered. I mean, we all liked Annabeth, and we wanted her to have a quest, but this one seemed insanely dangerous. After what I'd seen of Chris Rodriguez, I didn't even want to think about Annabeth descending into that weird maze again. Chiron scraped a hoof on the dirt floor. What did the prophecy say exactly, my dear? The wording is important. Annabeth took a deep breath. Well, it said, you shall delve in the darkness of the endless maze. We waited. The dead, the traitor, and the lost one raise. Grover perked up. The lost one. That must mean Pan. That's great. With the dead and the traitor, I added. Not so great. And Chiron asked, what is the rest? You shall rise or fall by the Ghost King's hand, Annabeth said, the child of Athena's final stand. Everyone looked around uncomfortably. Annabeth was a daughter of Athena, and a final stand didn't sound good. Hey, we shouldn't jump to conclusions, Silena said. Annabeth isn't the only child of Athena, right? But who's this Ghost King? Beckendorf asked. No one answered. I thought about the Iris message I'd seen of Nico summoning spirits. I had a bad feeling the prophecy was connected to that. Are there more lines? Chiron asked. The prophecy does not sound complete. Annabeth hesitated. I don't remember exactly. Chiron raised an eyebrow. Annabeth was known for her memory. She never forgot something she heard. Annabeth shifted on her bench. Something about destroy with a hero's final breath. And Chiron asked. She stood. Look. The point is, I have to go in. I'll find the workshop and stop Luke. And I need help. She turned to me. Will you come? I didn't even hesitate. I'm in. She smiled for the first time in days, and that made it all worthwhile. Grover, you too? The wild god is waiting. Grover seemed to forget how much he hated the underground. The line about the lost one had completely energized him. I'll pack extra recyclables for snacks. And Tyson, Annabeth said. I'll need you too. Yay. Blow things up time. Tyson clapped so hard he woke up Mrs. O'Leary, who was dozing in the corner. Wait. Annabeth, Chiron said. This goes against the ancient laws. A hero is allowed only 2 companions. I need 'em all, she insisted. Chiron, it's important. I didn't know why she was so certain, but I was happy she'd included Tyson. I couldn't imagine leaving him behind. He was huge and strong and great at figuring out mechanical things. Unlike satyrs, Cyclopes had no problem underground. Annabeth. Chiron flicked his tail nervously. Consider well. You would be breaking the ancient laws, and there are always consequences. Last winter, 5 went on a quest to save Artemis. Only 3 came back. Think on that. 3 is a sacred number. There are 3 fates, 3 furies, 3 Olympian sons of Kronos. It is a good strong number that stands against many dangers. 4. This is risky. Annabeth took a deep breath. I know. But we have to. Please. I could tell Chiron didn't like it. Quintus was studying us, like he was trying to decide which of us would come back alive. Chiron sighed. Very well. Let us adjourn. The members of the quest must prepare themselves. Tomorrow at dawn, we send you into the labyrinth. Quintus pulled me aside as the council was breaking up. I have a bad feeling about this, he told me. Mrs. O'Leary came over, wagging her tail happily. She dropped her shield at my feet, and I threw it for her. Quintus watched her romp after it. I remembered what Juniper had said about him scouting out the maze. I didn't trust him, but when he looked at me, I saw real concern in his eyes. I don't like the idea of you going down there, he said. Any of you. But if you must, I want you to remember something. The labyrinth exists to fool you. It will distract you. That's dangerous for half-bloods. We are easily distracted. You've been in there? Long ago. His voice was ragged. I barely escaped with my life. Most who enter aren't that lucky. He gripped my shoulder. Percy, keep your mind on what matters most. If you can do that, you might find the way. And here, I wanted to give you something. He handed me a little silver tube. It was so cold I almost dropped it. A whistle? I asked. A dog whistle, Quintus said. For Mrs. O'Leary. Thanks. But how will it work in the maze? I'm not 100% certain it will. But Mrs. O'Leary is a hellhound. She can appear when called, no matter how far away she is. I'd feel better knowing you had this. If you really need help, use it. But be careful, the whistle is made of Stygian ice. What ice? From the river Styx. Very hard to craft. Very delicate. It cannot melt, but it will shatter when you blow it, so you can only use it once. I thought about Luke, my old enemy. Right before I'd gone on my first quest, Luke had given me a gift. 2 magic shoes that had been designed to drag me to my death. Quintus seemed nice, so concerned. And Mrs. O'Leary liked him, which had to count for something. She dropped the slimy shield at my feet and barked excitedly. I felt ashamed that I could even think about mistrusting Quintus. But then again, I'd trusted Luke once. Thanks, I told Quintus. I slipped the freezing whistle into my pocket, promising myself that I would never use it, and I dashed off to find Annabeth. As long as I'd been at camp, I'd never been inside the Athena cabin. It was a silvery building. Nothing fancy, with plain white curtains and a carved stone owl over the doorway. The owl's onyx eyes seemed to follow me as I walked closer. Hello? I called inside. Nobody answered. I stepped in and caught my breath. The place was a workshop for brainiac kids. The bunks were all pushed against one wall as if sleeping didn't matter very much. Most of the room was filled with workbenches and tables and sets of tools and weapons. The back of the room was a huge library, crammed with old scrolls and leather-bound books and paperbacks. There was an architect's drafting table with a bunch of rulers and protractors, and some 3D models of buildings. Huge old war maps were plastered to the ceiling. Sets of armor hung under the windows, their bronze plates glinting in the sun. Annabeth stood in the back of the room, rifling through old scrolls. "Knock, knock," I said. She turned with a start. "Oh. Hi. Didn't hear you. You okay?" She frowned at the scroll in her hands. "Just trying to do some research. Daedalus's Labyrinth is so huge. None of the stories agree about anything. The maps just lead from nowhere to nowhere." I thought about what Quintus had said, how the maze tries to distract you. I wondered if Annabeth knew that already. "We'll figure it out," I promised. Her hair had come loose and was hanging in a tangled blonde curtain all around her face. Her grey eyes looked almost black. "I've wanted to lead a quest since I was 7, she said. "You're going to do awesome." She looked at me gratefully, but then stared down at all the books and scrolls she'd pulled from the shelves. "I'm worried, Percy. Maybe I shouldn't have asked you to do this. Or Tyson or Grover. Hey. We're your friends. We wouldn't miss it." But she stopped herself. "What is it?" I asked. "The prophecy? I'm sure it's fine," she said in a small voice. "What was the last line?" Then she did something that really surprised me. She blinked back tears and put out her arms. I stepped forward and hugged her. Butterflies started turning my stomach into a mosh pit. "Hey. It's okay." I patted her back. I was aware of everything in the room. I felt like I could read the tiniest print on any book on the shelves. Annabeth's hair smelled like lemon soap. She was shivering. "Chiron might be right," she muttered. "I'm breaking the rules. But I don't know what else to do. I need you 3. It just feels right." "Then don't worry about it," I managed. "We've had plenty of problems before, and we solved them. This is different. I don't want anything happening to any of you." Behind me, somebody cleared his throat. It was one of Annabeth's half-brothers, Malcolm. His face was bright red. Sorry," he said. "Archery practice is starting, Annabeth. Chiron said to come find you." I stepped away from Annabeth. "We were just looking at maps," I said stupidly. Malcolm stared at me. "Okay, tell Chiron I'll be right there," Annabeth said, and Malcolm left in a hurry. Annabeth rubbed her eyes. "You go ahead, Percy. I'd better get ready for archery." I nodded, feeling more confused than I ever had in my life. I wanted to run from the cabin, but then again I didn't. "Annabeth," I said, "about your prophecy. The line about a hero's last breath. You're wondering which hero?" "I don't know. No. Something else. I was thinking the last line usually rhymes with the one before it. Was it something about? Did it end in the word death?" Annabeth stared down at her scrolls. "You'd better go, Percy. Get ready for the quest. I'll see you in the morning." I left her there, staring at maps that led from nowhere to nowhere, but I Couldn't shake the feeling that one of us wasn't going to come back from this quest alive.